Pull up the talk here. And thank you for joining us. I know it's a beautiful, almost summer day, for even though I think we're still officially in spring, but it's a beautiful day out here. And today I'm going to take you into the world of cranes and talk about how cranes are ambassadors for conservation. And I was fortunate last year, the International Crane Foundation was founded in 1973 to help save cranes, and I was elected to the board of directors last year, so I was pretty excited. But I have to figure out, whoops, how do you, oh, there it is, okay. I am a birder, but I was telling Sue I'm not a very good birder. So I call myself an amateur ornithologist. And just as I was retiring, I met Dr. George Archibald, the co-founder, and went up to Baraboo where they have, the International Crane Center. And it also has a place with all 15 cranes, and got talking and decided to go on some great trips to learn more about cranes. And I'll be sharing some of these with you. I got a chance to band cranes in Mongolia and South Africa. And fly around and view cranes with Rich Belfus, who's here in the plane. And that's me in the back. And this is my beautiful wife who tolerates me on all my excursions. So somebody might say, why cranes? The first reason is they're ancient birds. They're alluring, they're inspiring. And if you go back through time, through all the cultures, they're symbols of happiness, eternal youth, good fortune, everything good. So everybody wants, the cranes. As a bird, they're some of your largest, dramatic looking birds, flying birds in the wild. They're elegant, as this blue crane shows. And they're just beautiful as the crown on this great crown crane, and one of my favorite cranes. They're just beautiful birds. And when they get together as a pair, a lot of them, like these source cranes, have a harmony mating call that's unique as they call. And it's just a beautiful thing to hear, and it makes their bond, firmer. And that's where people think about fidelity, cranes and fidelity, because of this long-term bond. They make great parents with both of them involved in the incubation and the rearing, as seen here with the whooping cranes. And they take us to stunning places. You can find cranes, in some fantastic places. And here you have some great crown cranes. And actually, while they have the backdrop of the Drakensberg Mountains, they're actually doing a dance. And cranes do dance, and they do some incredible dances, and they're great to watch. And I firmly believe, since these cranes have been around a long time, they actually taught us how to dance back then. So, but don't record that part, okay? Cranes do some great migrations. In this case, like the black crown cranes and the demoiselle cranes, they fly over the Himalayas to go from, the Tibetan plateau down to Bhutan to winter. Stay for the winter. So it's extraordinary, going over 14,000 feet, just marvelous. They also congregate in large numbers. And if you've ever been to the Platte River, it's one of the marvelous things one could do. It's life-changing. It's like the second Serengeti, where you can see 750,000 sandhill cranes in March and April come into this area. And when they get done, by the time they roost here at night, and by time evening is really in force, this whole area will be covered in cranes. But it's just not cranes. There's all kind of other birds, wetland birds. It's just a marvelous, marvelous thing. So I recommend, if you haven't been there, it's a great place to go. But cranes have been part of our culture for millennia. And, they've had a very positive impact. This is an artwork from our Native Americans, Native American Indians, and this is drawn on a rock in Utah, signifying, glorifying cranes. They're found in a lot of crane artwork, especially in Asia, where you can see the three cranes here on this temple at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, which we were supposed to go to last year, but COVID stopped that trip. And they're you see them. They're just like I said, because of what they represent. You see them in books. You see them, on silk kimonos. Because again, it's happiness, internal youth, and they made a great deal. But cranes have also made it into our mainstream in our culture today. All 15 species of crane appears on stamps, and over 80 countries have printed stamps with cranes on. And you can see them nowadays, on posters, on wine bottles. The airlines has them as logos. And they also penetrated our craft beer market, showing how important they are with Whooping Crane, Red Ale, or Sandhill Crane. So they are a very part of our culture. And because of that, and they're big and conspicuous, people, it's something one could rally around. Cranes are also indicators of our healthy landscapes. They're big, conspicuous birds, and they need a lot of real estate. Mainly they're associated with wetlands, but they also need some grasslands, prairie as well, but mainly associated with wetlands. And you take our whooping crane, and which basically winters over in Texas and flies 2,500 miles back to northern Canada to breed. But when he's in Texas, he needs a lot of energy, a lot of protein, and he loves this blue crab. And that's how he makes his that's his meal. But the salinity has to be right. So you need these indicators, salinity is right for it to work. And so cranes and crabs are good indicators of this system. A lot of the cranes are vegetarians, as you can see in Poyon Lake with these Siberian cranes, as they look for tubulars in the ground. And these long beaks of cranes, when you see them, they're actually made for probing for food in the water where you can't see, and they're just probing along. And again, these tubulars grow under certain conditions. And cranes are there and they can tell you they have conditions, but it also represents other birds as well. Climate change is coming into the fore with a lot of birds. And this is like the black neck cranes that we just saw. Here they are nesting on a Tibetan plateau, but these wetlands are fed by the streams from the glaciers. And of course, if the glaciers disappear, so will these wetlands. So the black-necked cranes are sort of on this balance, but it tells us what's going on in places we can't reach. Cranes are also flagships for saving amazing places throughout the world, and we'll see a few of them. And we're saving the places for wildlife and people. Here, the SARS cranes, basically 6 reserves have been placed aside, the last remaining wetlands in the Mekong Delta. They used to be a very huge complex, but yet because of the SARS cranes, we were able to protect some of this wetlands, not only for SARS cranes, and these are the largest flying birds in the world. They stand about 6 foot tall. And I love looking at a bird eye, to be honest with you, because I'm 6 foot tall. It's kind of nice to do that. But, tallest birds in the world. But we save this land for a lot of other birds that politicians and people might not be as interested in, smaller birds of no importance, but they act as a flagship or umbrella to a lot of these other birds that we care so much about. The true craniacs are in China. They have created 46 national crane nature reserves protecting 71 million acres in China, just for the cranes. But of course, when they do it for the cranes, they have everything like these swan geese that are basically 100% down in Poyon Lake, the population. So there's so many birds that are being protected because of the emphasis on cranes. And even in the US, we have done a lot of conservation on public and private lands. A lot of our, I keep thinking, wildlife refuge to help with the whooping crane, and in the West, out on the West Coast with the Sandhill cranes. and a lot of private land. I mean, a lot of farmers leave leave corn, waste corn for cranes for their migrating and things. So we've done a lot of that too in this US. And you could find them in wildlife-rich landscapes. This was the last trip I was telling Sue about to Chad, where we were counting these are the black crown cranes, we were counting them. And you find these birds with all kind of other animals, in this case with some elephants, and there's a great wide variety, of wildlife in these places that, you find cranes. And these are also people-rich landscapes. You're out and in places that are so beautiful, and wherever there are cranes, there are usually people, usually farming, nomads, all kind of things, and they share the landscapes with the cranes. And so when we talk about conservation of cranes and stories of cranes, there are also stories of people and how we could work together and have a win-win where people and wildlife can coexist together. And because of this cultural aspect, people loving cranes, and they're big and they're beautiful, and they have a lot to offer, they make great ambassadors. They bring people together that you normally wouldn't have expected. In this case here, you had about 8 countries working to help with the Siberian crane that was, going through Russia, India, Iran, Iraq, and a few others, getting people together to see how you could protect that crane. In Africa, this is the African team. It's a partnership of ICF with the Endangered Wildlife Trust called the African Crane Conservation Program. And you have people here from 12 countries that work together to save cranes, throughout Africa. And in Korea, North and South don't agree about too much, but they were able to get together, to work together to save the cranes, to save the red-naped crane, the red crown cranes, and the white-naped cranes. So cranes bring people together regardless of politics. And the gentleman in the plaid shirt in the center there is Dr. George Archibald, one of the co-founders of the International Crane Foundation, and a good man. Cranes, there are over 30 crane festivals around the world. This is one I was at in Bhutan, in which they celebrate those same black-neck cranes coming in, for the winter. And they have these crane dances and songs and public showings, and it's really great. And there's a lot of crane shows, crane festivals in this country as well that are quite enjoyable, where one could learn a lot about cranes. But cranes, for another reason of concern, is from a true conservation aspect, is they're a highly endangered family of birds. They used to be probably one of the highest, but I think the vultures in Asia and Africa probably are probably really at the top now. But out of the 15 species of cranes, 11, are on the red listed, as in some type of an endangered category. And that's very worrisome. And the 4 species that aren't have populations that might be in trouble as well. So they are a family, of birds that are worth, working to save. And we all know what the conservation challenges are. We could probably each write a list and come up with the same 6 or 8 things. And with cranes, of course, since a lot of them are predominantly wetland based, it's really more to deal with the destruction of the wetlands, and the wetlands and the, grasslands that they utilize either, through, altering the habitat, putting in dams and changing how streams and marshlands, work really affect a lot of birds. Just the disturbance of the wetlands, fire. So it all has. And, we all have to figure out how to live on this land without spoiling it. And that's something we try to work on. Here are the 15 species of cranes. They are in the 5 continents. They're not in South America or in Arctic. And the bulk of the cranes tend to be in the Asia, Southeast Asia complex. And you can see, they do some, they're great routes there in here. We're going to give you a few stories of some of the birds I work with, share some of my stories. First, we're going to go to Africa, and we're going to talk about 2 of the cranes there. The first one is the national bird of South Africa, the elegant blue crane. And again, it has national status. It's listed as vulnerable. And so there is some concern about this bird. Basically, this is a blow up. This is where the blue crane range is. As you can see, it's predominantly in South Africa. Less than 1% of the population is in Namibia. The stronghold used to be the eastern grasslands. Because of development, because of mining and agricultures, basically the grasslands were basically destroyed. And right now, only 14% of the birds are in this area. And when people started to see the decline in the eastern grasslands, the Eastern Cape, they got very concerned because populations, they didn't know what was happening, with the loss of population. The other stronghold used to be the Karoo. And there's a lot of, they call it farmland, but farmland, ranch land, it's the same thing out in some of these places. And the Karoo, as you can see, it holds 30% of the population, and this has stayed the same. What has changed is the birds have moved to the Western Cape. This used to be a 5-ball type system, as you can see here, that wasn't good, for crane usage. However, development has changed all that. And with that development, the cranes have moved in. And what we're talking about, development into an agriculture system of either farming for wheat and barley or going into livestock for cattle or sheep. And this is now what these cranes have to look to. This is not natural. This is modified. And the question that comes up, can the birds survive in this new type of habitat? And there's a lot of concern being the national bird. And of course, to understand a bird, one has to understand its movements across the terrain. And so one of the projects that I was able to help out with is helping ban some of the blue cranes. And here, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put this GPS tracker on. Of course, you can't see my finger. This GPS tracker, it's going to be attached with a harness and some, leg tags put on, and they're going to track the bird where it goes. The best place to do this is really where they're basically a sheep farm, because as you can see, the blue cranes are around. They have troughs where cranes are fed, or they have troughs where sheep are fed, as you can see in the lower left, and full of corn. And of course, this is a winter season, cranes are loafing, and this is really some free meal. And so to catch the cranes, we put out these nooses on using fishing wire, put out little nooses so we get their legs, and we put sometimes 3 or 4 strings around the troughs. As you see, I'm the older guy and I wear the knee pads, so I could do this again tomorrow. I've learned knee pads are good for crawling underground. And after you get the snares all ready, you wait for the cranes to fly in. And here they come. I mean, again, very elegant looking bunch. And you're just sitting there waiting, and you're hoping, and you see them just milling around, and you're just, like on the edge of your seat, ready to go. And of course, then what happens is the sheep come in, and then it comes a contest. Are you going to catch a crane, or are you going to catch one of the sheep? And you don't want the sheep, of course. But sooner or later, you do get somebody in a snare. I wasn't quick enough to rush out there. These young ladies, there's a difference between 20-year-old and a 60-year-old, which I soon found out they were able to get there quicker than I could, to subdue the bird and put a hood on it to quiet it down. And they let me handle the first one. And here we are, after they take their measurements and such, you can see them there fixing the backpack. And this is sort of artsy because you want it snug, but not too tight, but you don't want it too loose. So it really takes some experience to really put these on, because we want them to stay on for maybe a year or two, or as long as it lasts. And then we get together when we're all ready and we let it go. And there it is. The critical thing here is making sure you take the hood off the bird before it flies away. And what happens is we were able to put GPS trackers on 7 birds. And of course, they've been doing this, so they have a lot of birds. And these are some of the tracks they get where the birds go. And you could tell a lot, depending on the time of the year. If the tracker stops, it could tell you that it's breeding or it died. So it helps a great deal. You got data points all over. And so they're getting some great data. And they're starting to use some of this data. And one of the areas that have concerned is, South Africa, like a lot of countries in Africa, are trying to electrify the interior. You get electricity to a lot of people. And they're doing it in some cases with green energy, as you can see here with the wind towers. And you also notice there's a nice place, the blue cranes have eggs here. It's also a nice place for roosting. And the problem is not the wind towers, but all the power lines that are coming off these wind towers. And the problem with these power lines is that when the cranes come in to roost or come back to the nest, at low light, in the evening when there's a low light, they can't see the lines and they end up running into them and getting killed. This is not only to cranes, but also to raptors as well. I've seen it in Mongolia. It happens here in the US. So it's a major problem for a lot of birds is the power lines. And they've had people do a study and in 2012 determined that blue cranes were suffering a 10% a year mortality from power lines. Just think about that, a 10% a year mortality, which could decimate a population in no time, but luckily the cranes were increasing at the times. So they decided, as in most places, we needed to work on this problem. So they did get together with the various partners, with the universities and Eskom, who's the national power company for South Africa, to work on ways to minimize crane collisions. And they come up with all kinds of devices that will allow the cranes to recognize, the power lines at low light. Here's one of the things, it's a solar power, and then at night it glows, so cranes can see it, and they put them on the power lines. And of course, this is an expensive endeavor for the power companies to do this. But again, they also recognize the cultural impact of it being a national bird. And there's a study going on right now to see how well these are doing. So hopefully we'll have solved the this mortality problem. We've done the same things with Sandhill cranes with some things, and we have worked some remarkable wonders by allowing them to know about power lines. The other thing is with the birds, of course, this is all farmland, and is to talk to farmers. And not all farmers are the same. In different regions, farmers are different. And you want to talk to them to make sure they're accepting, because the cranes are using these, as you saw, for loafing in the wintertime. All these farms have these wetlands or watering sources and they're great for nesting. And you want to make sure your partner's, the farmer is your friend. And you also want to talk to them about poisoning, because a lot of birds are associated with crop, destruction. And you want to make sure there's no poisoning. And even though cranes don't do the destruction, poisoning for geese or things like that, will carry, cranes will also be caught up. So you want to talk to the farmers and get them on your side and find out what they're doing and what they're thinking. There's also talking to them about damage by fences. As we worried about power line, but there's also potential, you could barely see the fence here, but there's now, mortality by fences. But the greatest concern, it's, what are farmers thinking? 2-3 years ago, South Africa, we were talking about a drought, but South Africa had such a drought that it actually ran out of water. And of course, that's a big concern for farmers. And, if temperatures keep increasing and there's problems with waters, farmers could change their crops. They can now, they're in a modified habitat for cranes. They could change again, and they could change practically overnight to something maybe like grapes or whatever that isn't a food for the cranes. And all of a sudden, the cranes could be left out, high and dry, because where else could they go? And so the future for blue cranes, and they're asking the question, is it safe? Will this habitat exist, or is it a ticking time bomb? And maybe in a few years, I could get back to you on that, but people are working on that for a very beautiful bird. I'd like to take you up to, Kenya. We're going to go up in this area here to talk about one of the prettiest birds, the jewels of the savanna, the gray crowned crane. It's a bird that basically, as you see, is very beautiful, but in the last 40 years has gone an 80% reduction in numbers and population. And it was placed on the endangered species list about 5-6 years ago. One of the cool things about the gray crown and black crown cranes, they're the only two cranes that could actually roost in trees. So I think that's pretty exciting. Western Kenya, this is where we're going. It's not the Serengeti, where everybody goes with the, safaris and such, but this has its own tranquil beauty, being in this Western area here. And you can see on this larger map, the wetlands that, will potentially harbor cranes. It's a beautiful area. It's a mix of subsistence farms and wetlands, and along with, these quaint old little towns, little rustic at places, but the people are wonderful. They're proud, they're excited, and they care about their wildlife, and they want to help protect it. So you have the people, then you have the cranes, and the cranes, because the gray crown cranes, they're more generalist feeders. They have adapted to this modified habitat with people, as you can see right here. Especially when it's the non-breeding season, where they get together in large flocks, up to 1,000 birds, where they hang out, looking for food in the fields or farmlands, or they go over to the pasture and see what they could find laying around. What really matters is during the nesting season, where, they need quiet and solitude and not disturbance. And here, this is the problem with people with the potential disturbance, because there's the crane, and it's more concerned about what the person's doing than maybe watching what's happening on the nest. But it's just not people disturbance, cattle, livestock could trample the nests. You have people really destroying the wetlands. And what was once a great wetland from side to side here is now just this little trickle. And this water comes from the mountains, from the the mountain and goes right into Victoria Bay. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. The wetlands have been bypassed, which is sad. And of course, whenever you have disturbance and people know where nests are, there's been a very active captive crane trade market. They go in and they take the young birds and they sell them, to a variety of places. The sad thing here, the mortality of these chicks is sometimes 90%. And they go to hotels, they go to private collectors and some zoos and that. And it's really has been decimating the gray crown population. But again, people working together to develop a win-win strategy. And it starts working, with governments, with people. On the right, basically I'm in a meeting, we're talking about, water towers and this and that, because wetlands, everybody realizes wetlands are very critical in Kenya. They're understanding that, and they really do want to protect them, on a government level. And then, but conservation is really carried out on the left with the communities. You're dealing not with one farmer, but a collective sometimes of people, and talking to them. And really we want to say, hey, we need your help to protect, cranes. And they want to do that, but they also said, hey, if you want us to stay out of our wetlands, we have some issues. There's insecurity issues about water, about food and livelihoods if you say you have to leave the wetlands. So as a conservationist, you have to help solve these issues so they will work together. And that's where you come up with these conservation agreements where people will help save the cranes. They'll try to minimize disturbance in the wetlands, but you have to solve their issues. For example, we're fortunate, we have water spigots. We go to our kitchen, we get water. These people in these rural areas have to go down to the wetlands with these 5-gallon containers and take whatever they could get. And it might not be the best water there is. And it's not only the people, it's schools and dispensaries are all using the same water. But by working together, you start tapping into these springs that are running through the area. So people don't have to go to the wetlands. They stay out, plus they have clean, clean portable drinking water, as you can see, which is a win-win for everybody. To get livestock out, the livestock are in the wetlands because they're eating, the grasses and that, is to work with the farmers or the people to grow what they call fodder. And this is and you do this up on the uplands. And we had a chance to visit his farmer's areas, and you can see his family in the background. And he was very excited, showing off. He thought his fodder was the best there was. He was very proud of what he was doing for his livestock. Tree nurseries are very good. Planting trees and selling trees. Again, putting trees around the wetlands makes a buffer. A lot of the animals, not only cranes, but some of the monkeys and some of the other animals need trees. And of course, cranes love trees because that's where they roost. But trees, when planted, can be used for all kinds of purposes, from firewood to medicinal, to shade. So trees are very important, and this is a livelihood that they're opening. And this is Rich Belfast with Maurice, and in 1993, he planted a teak tree. And it's just showing you how well it's grown, and since he's been there almost 30 years ago. We start talking about livelihoods, losing not being able to farm into wetlands has a cost. And again, it's economics. Say, okay, you don't farm, but let's get you some other livelihoods. One is beekeeping, where we work with them, not only to, make honey, but also sell. And wherever we went, everybody brought out their can of raw honey, and we all had a taste. It was my first taste of raw honey, and it was really good. And another program they started was dairy goats. I never would put dairy and goats together, but it is because they produce milk, and they were given this so they could produce milk and sell it to other people. These two people here were very happy to show us their goats, and where the goats were kept. And one thing about goats, as you can see on the bottom left, they do eat about anything. So they eat any type of vegetation. So again, this is another program of giving people livelihood in exchange for, staying out of the wetland. And working with volunteers, building what we're talking about, crane custodians, which will go out and help, to go out and maybe help monitor, because the researchers can't be there, or make sure things are going. So getting people excited to help out in monitoring their cranes. These are their birds, and they're all excited and happy to be involved and to help what's needed. And when COVID hit, I was so proud and pleased to see the crane, the people from the crane office going out to assist all these people in the communities. In this case, giving them soap, hand wash, and masks that they needed but couldn't afford, and going out and working with the communities, because it is you're in this together. And we talk about our COVID meetings. This is how you have a COVID meeting in Kenya, to talk about what's going on. So it's all about working with people. We're trying to scale up this project to hit more communities as we find where more and more, where cranes are going. And we're hoping that the cranes population will stabilize and continue to grow. The last group, the last story I want to tell you about is our own Sandhill Crane. If I was with you in live, I'd ask people to raise their hands, say how many people have seen Sandhill Cranes, and I would hope everybody. This is, we'll find out, has been a success story. And you can see they basically breed in Canada and parts of the US, and basically, they winter in the southern part of their country. But it is a great conservation success story. We have 1 million cranes, people estimate about now. About 70 years ago or so, Aldo Leopold was giving an elegy to the Sandhill Crane. He thought they were going to go the way of the whooping crane, because they were disappearing in where he lived up in Wisconsin. And he would have been correct, but a couple things, and again, the reason why was hunting. There's, people just hunted, and you could see here, whooping cranes, Sandhill cranes. We came in and destroyed the prairies and the grasslands that the, Sandhill cranes needed. And, wetlands disappeared. As you could look at this map, PA's in the green, Ohio's in the red. We lost a lot of the wetlands. But then about 100 years ago, things changed on several levels. The Migratory Bird Treaty came in and said you can't, shoot migratory birds. And that was the start. Farmers, a lot of thanks to farmers, because they allowed Sandhill cranes back. They invited them back, and the corn, the leftover corn was really great for cranes, especially in migration and wintering. As you can see, I'm looking for, grains of corn or kernels of corn. But we also begin to appreciate our wetlands. And so everything started coming together. We kept shooting birds. The farmers gave them, again, a different type of modified habitat, as you've been seeing, and our wetlands. We started protecting our wetlands more, and the cranes came back. And I was working on PA, but I got bumped last night, as I was mentioning to Sue. But for Ohio, when they did the breeding bird survey, which is very similar to PA, the first breeding bird survey about 30 years ago, there was hardly any cranes listed. When Ohio did their second breeding bird atlas, about 5 years, published it 5 years ago, you could definitely see the growth of the crane population. And of course, with the as it's hitting eastern Ohio, it's actually going into Crawford County and Mercer County. there are birds being sighted on Presque Isle. There's a lot of calling going on. And one thing about sandhill cranes, they're very easy, of course, to see in the wintertime, but in the summertime, they get in these marshlands and they sort of disappear. And because of the vegetation, they hunker down, they paint themselves with the clay, so they blend in. And this shows me I was trying to go out and visit a crane nest, and I tell you, it's not easy to do. But the cranes are coming back, and it's a true success story. And hopefully, if you haven't, find some nesting, on Presque Isle. But the stories I share today are stories of success, not only for cranes and other biodiversity, but, for people, by, saving healthy landscapes, we save it for the people, to sustain people and diversity. So it's a win-win. And ICF has all kind of greater programs, from managing the Kafue Flats in Zambia to creating a product of Saurus rice in Myanmar so we could save the Siberian crane or the Saurus crane there. So there's a lot more stories that one could tell. I would like to end with a little trip to the International Crane Foundation. They just did a renovation a couple years ago. Of course, they couldn't open last year, so this is an exciting time for them. And they have all 15 species of cranes, so you could come up and see them all. I've only seen 12 in the wild. I'm missing 3, but I see all 15 here. And you go into the George Archibald Welcome Center, and basically you get to learn all about cranes, the stories, what they eat. It's extremely educational. You go out on the exhibits, and they have huge exhibits and a lot of natural behaviors. Here's our friend, the black-necked crane, and shown here with these beautiful murals of the Tibetan Plateau. This muralist did a great job. And the crane behaviors are so great. On the first day there, the Demoso crane laid 2 eggs in front of people. The wattle crane is eating snakes. I mean, it's really wonderful. Here's the Saurus crane, the tallest crane in the world. And you get to see him eye to eye. And when you get done here, the message they're trying to come across is to get people to care about conservation, to engage in conservation, and to act in conservation. And I know that's what your Audubon chapter is all about as well. You guys, this is things that you're doing and acting, but it's very important that this message comes out. And Cranes, as an ambassador, as a flagship, really does a great job in doing this throughout the world. And one of the graphics they have there is saving cranes and the places where cranes dance. I think it's really great, and it's kind of says it all. And I want to thank you for joining me tonight. This is one of the birds I banned in Mongolia. He had an attitude when I got done with him. He did not like to be banded, and let me know. And I will take them. But if not, if you'd like to get information about ICF, text or email, just text this, and you could just get information about cranes and conservation. I'll give it back to you, Sue.
Okay. Oh boy. Maybe you have to stop screen sharing.
Okay, we could stop sharing. Well, there was
okay. Wow, that was really great. Thanks. I know my screen here is very fuzzy. The light is turned off. Does anybody have any questions? You want to chime in with questions? Please do so, or you can put them in the chat. I'll open up the chat box and read them.
I have actually one question. Hi, Tom. I'm sorry. I'm Mary, and
Hi, Mary.
I fell asleep.
That's okay. I wanted to do the same thing, but they wouldn't let me.
There are several states now that the Sandhill cranes in the United States are doing so well. Some states have either opened them to hunting, or are talking about opening them to hunting. And I wanted to get your feelings or opinion about that.
Well, if the state makes hunting legal, then it's allowable. Kentucky and West Virginia, I think it's Kentucky and Tennessee allow hunting, and there's a few other states. And not, and they do publish reports on this yearly, and how many people got licenses and why it's a low yield. We have 1 million birds. If it's legal, you can't protest it. Nobody in the crane world likes it. We just have to make sure they have the right factual information when they make the decisions. They're trying to do hunting up in Wisconsin, and I know ICF, is definitely giving them a lot of input.
It says Wisconsin, as if it was Wisconsin.
Pardon? Carol? Was that Carol?
I don't know.
Okay. So yeah, it's frustrating. And we did a survey this year in a few counties, and the first question was, would these surveys in Ohio to count Sandhill cranes mean anything for a hunting season? And we had to tell people it wasn't. We just, sometimes, like I say, they want to count the cranes so we could tell how well our wetlands are doing. And the state levels don't do it. Usually it's at a federal level. But yeah, it's, you just fight it when you can. And whooping cranes aren't to be hunted. So they're definitely go after people that hunt and kill whooping cranes.
Someone asked, why do people want to hunt cranes? I think on one level, I think they eat them, but I'm not sure. On another level, I think it might just be sports.
Yeah, there was one postulation. I think people do eat them. I mean, after all, they eat, grain and stuff like that. A lot of corn. Some people said that, because ducks weren't flying as south, they wanted to give them something else to shoot at. But I don't know why people want to do it. What I read, there's not many licenses, given per as you do with duck hunters, But I guess I should study up on that question and let you know.
Well, I remember reading somewhere recently that that people liked the taste of Sandhill cranes.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Again, like I said, if they're eating corn, they could be pretty good, tasting.
Well, I was listening when you talked about South Korea and North Korea cooperating together to save the crane. And I had read somewhere that the demilitarized zone is a great place for great cranes because nobody goes there, they don't want to get shot by the other side. So these birds are kind of left alone there, and they're doing very well.
And that's the issue. I guess it's a 50-mile wide zone and all kind of wildlife, including some cranes, especially like the endangered red crown crane and white nape crane are there. And people are concerned because as soon as they open it up, it's going to be developed rather quickly, and the birds will have nowhere to go. So they're fighting to try to save or try to, make earmarks of national parks right now. Or of course they would not want them to do anything there, but development always happens. So they're working to try to, make it worthwhile for the cranes, to help save the cranes there.
Well, let's see. I think that's it for questions, Mary, as far as in the, excuse me. I might have, I'm still learning my way around here with Zoom. Yeah, I think that's it for the chat box, except Charles put in a link to the BBC News. I'm assuming that's going to be a link to something about cranes then, Charles?
Yes, it is.
Is that
It
in
is.
Ireland?
It is, and in fact, I was going to suggest that you put Ireland on your map. So if so as an Irishman myself, I'll tell you, basically, so there are no longer, you used to be able to go walk through any town and you would smell, there was a characteristic smell of a peat fire. And that doesn't exist anymore. The bogs are now protected. And one of the things that you need to do before you cut the peat is you need to, because the peat's it's basically vegetative matter. So it's really that's grown in a moist acidic area. So that's why they find mammoths and things in bogs. But in order to, before they cut the peat, they have to drain the water out. And so now they basically have stopped draining the water out. And so now apparently these cranes after 300 years are now returning. So you have to put Ireland on your map.
Well, no, that went around, and it's pretty exciting. These birds are returning to places they haven't been to, and that shows you the success that we're doing, with our wetlands and such. The birds feel safe, but it takes a while.
Yeah.
It takes a. But it works if we work together.
I very much enjoyed your description of things happening in Southern Africa, or particularly South Africa specifically, not just Namibia, but South Africa, and the change in the climate, which then has the cranes moving basically from east to west. And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize is that, particularly in the two places you mentioned in Africa, in South Africa and Kenya, and I think it would be true in a lot of other parts of Africa if there were cranes, are that people in many ways are much closer to the land than we are in the United States. And the symbiotic relationship, I think, in some ways is easier to do and in some ways harder to do because of the subsistence farming and things like that. I actually did take a trip out to, I had a conference in 2019 in Kansas City, and I specifically booked a trip to see the Sandhill Cranes. The problem was I couldn't cross the Missouri River because it was a horrendous flood. So I never got to Nebraska.
Wow.
But it was mid-March of 2019.
Yeah.
But that is one of my goals. But I did want to really highlight what you talked about in terms of South Africa and Kenya and the how much the people live in and of and with the land, which can be both difficult because of the subsistence farming, but also in some ways really outstanding because it is a much more symbiotic relationship than a lot of us have with our farmland or wetlands locally.
No, and you kind of hit it right on the nails. Sustainability and conservation are the same, where we kind of treat them differently, and they really do like their wildlife. But again, if you could help them with their insecurities, it's their wildlife. Mm-hmm. And they're really excited to help out, but we have to, if they're starving, they have to act differently, Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that's one of the great things, I noticed out there. And I'm sorry I didn't get to see the Platte. The Platte used to be the river that was a mile wide and like 2 inches deep. So I guess it was a little wider when you tried to cross it.
Well, I couldn't even cross the Missouri to get to the Platte because the bridge between Kansas and Nebraska was actually underwater. The interstate was underwater.
Wow.
Oh, good. Well, there's next year.
Hmm. Well, does anybody have any more comments or questions for Tom? Nothing? Okay, maybe we can meet you in person someday when, this pandemic,
yeah.
and you can, and come to the
I'd love
Tom
that.
Center and come birding, although you'll have to look for smaller birds than the cranes.
No, I checked eBird and people are hearing and seeing them right now
Yeah.
on up there. And they could be nesting there. It's just so hard,
Hmm.
Yes, Frida?
Greta, I got to see the sandhills in Eastern Washington.
Oh,
It was actually the week after the official Sandhill Crane Festival, but they do have one every year there. I think it's somewhere near Moses Lake.
yeah. I'm trying to think, and of course, that's dangerous, but there are like several different population and subspecies. And, we have the large one, but if you go over to the West Coast, you could maybe get the smaller subspecies of sandhill, the lesser sandhill, depending where you are. Because they're different species of sandhills.
Chris Lundberg, did you have a question? You put something in chat, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I had a question just a few years ago. For several years, I saw around Conneaut Marsh a pair of cranes, actually a trio of cranes, a pair with a third crane, and the third crane had one leg that was kind of bent out odd. And I was never quite sure if it was injured or if there was some natural explanation for the phenomenon. I never reported to anybody because I thought, how is anybody even going to go out and catch that thing? It seemed to have survived for several years. And I was just curious if Tom had ever encountered anything like that with cranes. If you had any ideas about what I was seeing.
What time of year was this?
Oh, I did. That bird was out there for several years.
Oh, okay.
All seasons. I assume it was
Okay.
one that had been born there and was wintering there.
Okay. No, I haven't seen that. My first thing is if something happened at birth and an accident along the way, migration or whatever, and his leg is like that. I don't know.
And I saw it for a good 3, maybe 4 years.
Wow.
I have not seen it now, so I don't know if it's now gone, but it had clearly been surviving, and so I never contacted anybody about it because I figured if it was surviving, the odds of people trying to actually catch that thing were pretty low, considering where it was just feeding out in the marsh and it had a big range and everything.
Yeah. Okay. No, I haven't seen that before. Of course, I don't see many sandhills either in Ohio. So I keep looking.
Tom, the person that was asking the question, Chris Lundberg, is the Erie Bird Observatory's crack marsh bird monitor.
Yeah.
And so if anybody knew if sandhill cranes were nesting at Presque Isle, he'd probably be the guy to know it. So
I have not
Chris,
seen them up there.
Yeah, I know.
have
But
not seen them up there.
And how do you feel about the potential for that?
I don't think, unless they were going to, across the bay, which then you got the city, unless they were finding spots, I don't think there's enough sort of drier meadow spots for feeding grounds. Unless the water level really went down and you had kind of the margins on some of those lagoons turn more into sort of wet meadow instead of more marsh. Because I think about like Conneaut Marsh where I see them. I mean, you got the marsh and I see them flying over the marsh and sometimes in the deeper parts of the marsh, but I also see them so much just feeding in various pastures all around, just if I'm driving all around Conneaut Marsh, they're all over there. And I don't see that habitat up at Presque Isle too much.
Okay.
Right, yeah, I associate sandhill cranes in Crawford County with kind of farmland.
Yeah. And that's why I say, I think if they were somehow nesting out there, they'd have to be flying to and from And, you got the urban area right there. So I just don't see that kind of habitat. But if I ever do find some up there, I'll let you know.
Yeah. I was just on eBird and, people are talking, some, of course, they're flying high, and you don't know, you see a bird flying and they say, I seen it at the marsh, and it's, just flying by. But, so I was checking and didn't go too far back, but there's hopefully one day. I'm an optimist.
All the ones that I've seen at Presque Isle have been flying.
Okay.
I've never seen one on the ground there.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard people talk about hearing them, over the marsh. That's why I wasn't quite sure, because usually you're going to hear them before you see them in many cases. And, Michael just said about Mercer County. Yeah, there's, I think, Mercer and Crawford, and then you have some in the center of the, your state. You have a nice, your breeding atlas has a nice, you can get on the web, on the web page, and you could put a bird in there and it'll give you the map. But I tried to print that so I could show it, but it didn't show the counties after it got done because of the very faint colorings. But you have the book was was very good about that. Just couldn't use it for the talk.
Mm.
Well, I guess that's it. No more comments.
Okay.
Anything. But it was great to hear that presentation, though. And I
Right.
really do hope you
Thank
make it to Presque Isle sometime.
Yeah,
And whether it's to see the cranes there or not.
I'll have to drag Jim with me.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah, if you do, let me know, and I'll make Evelyn come out of the nursing home.
All right, I'll tell him.
Okay.
Thank you, and I appreciate you listening today.
Oh, it was great. Thanks
Okay,
again.
bye.
Okay, bye.